Often ancient and replete with history, houses of worship provide the rituals that mark life, death, and all of the important milestones in between. Despite serving as symbols of mankind's loftiest spiritual ambitions, churches are, nevertheless, still subject to the spectrum of human frailty. From murder and untimely death to the practice of black magic, chapels, cathedrals, and temples are as likely to bear the stains of tragedy and evil as any haunted house. Although they may be built as sacred refuges for prayer, worship, and reflection to bring solace and peace to the faithful, believers in the paranormal contend that their unavoidable connection to death and the spirit world can also make churches magnets for ghostly activity. The Borgund Stave Church, Borgund, Norway. The unique architecture of this former church and its location in the middle of a medieval cemetery are chilling and fascinating. The only stone you find here is in the foundation. The building is named for the brilliant design it utilizes, consisting of only wood that's cut specifically to fit together without nails or stakes. It seems to have worked well since the building has stood for more than 1,000 years. Some sacred accessories remain, like the altar, and the walls are decorated with various engravings of animals and mystical creatures. The decor even includes Norse. The Church of Ghosts, Prague. St. George's Church near Prague has a permanent congregation but not a living one. On the old wooden benches, dozens of white-robed figures sit with heads bowed in quiet prayer. But before you start saying your own prayers, you should know that it's actually an art installation. Artist Jakub Pedrava was commissioned to bring the church back to life, and he succeeded, as now people flock from all over the world to visit this formerly unknown village and its praying ghosts. St. George's Church near Prague has a permanent congregation but not a living one. On the old wooden benches, dozens of white-robed figures sit with heads bowed in quiet prayer. Karda Monastery. This next creepy church location brings us back to Romania. In the Transylvanian countryside rests the quaint Karda Monastery. Most would recognize this location as its name ties it to the hit film, The Nun. It was used as the location for the horror flick, which portrayed the abbey as being haunted by a demonic nun. Although the real-life monastery doesn't have any such hauntings, it does have a few others of its own. Supposedly the ghosts of a number of monks who lived within the monastery during medieval times are still present. They are often seen roaming the churchyard of the monastery where their graves still sit. In addition to this, 2 large male skeletons were recently uncovered buried in the underground cellar of the church. Ever since, poltergeist activity has plagued the cellar and the church.
Audio Jungle.
The Snegov Monastery. Now on to Romania to find our next creepy church, the Snegov Monastery. This island-bound church at first glance seems picture-perfect, yet it does have a dark side. This church is the final resting place for one of the most notorious and bloodthirsty rulers of all time. Founded back in the 14th century, more than just one church has stood upon this island. The original wooden structure was doomed, eventually sinking into the surrounding lake, causing locals to believe the island was cursed. Eventually, this island was to become the resting place of Vlad Tepes, better known as Vlad the Impaler, of the real-life inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Vlad is said to be buried at the entrance to the church. There was a belief that Vlad had committed more atrocities in his life than any individual ever should, so he was placed at the church's entry so anyone walking over his grave would have to take some of his sins upon themselves. There remains some mystery and debate whether Vlad is actually even buried at the Snegov Monastery, and an excavation in the 1930s seems to support that he may be buried elsewhere. The monastery is still said to have ties to Vlad regardless, who had fortifications surrounding the island and a jail and torture chamber on the island itself.
In the year of our Lord, 1442, the Turkish Sultan enslaved 1,000 Transylvanian boys to fill the ranks of his army. These child slaves were beaten without mercy, trained to kill without conscience, to crave the blood of all who defied the Turks. From among these boys, one grew into a warrior so fierce that entire armies would retreat in terror at the mention of his name. Vlad the Impaler, son of the dragon.
Sedlec Ossuary, Czech Republic. In Kutna Hora, Czech Republic, enter the unassuming chapel called the Sedlec Ossuary. Now wait for this, the chapel is artistically, and jaw-droppingly, decorated with more than 40,000 human skeletons. And this has to be the creepiest and perhaps the coolest star travel attraction. The massive chandelier of bones contains at least one of every human bone. Every fixture and decorative piece in Sedlec Ossuary is made from real human bones that date back to 1511. The arches and pyramids are lined with skulls that are made from 40,000 to 70,000 skeletons. In 1870, the Schwarzenberg family commissioned woodcarver František Rent to redesign the harrowing bone pyramids in 1870 and the Schwarzenberg coat of arms near the entrance of the chapel. If you are wondering how all these bones ended up in a chapel in the Czech Republic, the remains of the 40,000 individuals requested to be buried in a holy place, and the Church of Bones were more than willing to take their remains.